Hello everyone and welcome to a new Kerbal Space Program series of mine that I am calling In the Name of Science. I assume if you clicked on this video you're probably very familiar with this game, although it has been quite a while since I've uploaded on this channel, and thus will probably have a lot of new viewers. Also, as this is the start of the series, I figured I'd give a brief introduction into the game anyway. Kerbal Space Program is a game where you lead the alien race known as the Kerbals to the stars. The game allows you to build all kinds of vessels to further push the boundaries of science and bring Kerbals closer to being a spacefaring civilization. It also has some of the most realistic rocketry and orbital mechanics of any game out there. The game allows you to explore a fictional and scaled down solar system with scaled down rocket parts that resemble real life space technologies. Now, to be fair, there are mods made by the community that make the Kerbal solar system our real solar system and add real rocket parts and the complex problems that come with them, but I definitely need to play a little more of that before I could really make videos on it. In this series, I'll be playing the science mode, in which you have to collect data from many destinations to either transmit or bring back to the home planet Kerbin in exchange for science points, which allow you to unlock new rocket parts, to build bigger rockets to collect even more science. Also, if you are a former viewer of this channel, you may be wondering where I've been, and to be honest, after the sequel Kerbal Space Program 2 stopped development, me being the absolute space nerd that I am, I had no idea what to do with this channel and make videos on. I mean, sure, there are other very exciting spaceflight simulation games in development, but they are clearly well and truly in development. And based on experience with Kerbal Space Program 2's early access release, they can take all the time they need. However, although Kerbal Space Program 1 has obviously stopped development, there are many mods made by the incredible community that can completely transform the game, and I felt that I had to look into this. So after many experimental videos that I wasn't really happy with and an absolutely insane list of mods, I finally came up with the idea for this series. In this first episode, we have the goal of exploring the entire Kerbin system, which includes the Kerbal's home planet Kerbin, as well as its two moons known as the Mun and Minmus. However, across the entire series, I have a few goals. Complete the entire extended community science tech tree, from simple solid rocket boosters to faster than light technologies. Plant a flag on every single planet in the Kerbal system with the added Outer Planets mod and Minor Planets mod, explore the unique solar system added in the Kcabeloh System Mod, as well as the many systems added in the Kerbal Star Systems 2 mod. Create permanent self-sustaining colonies on every habitable or partially habitable planet and moon across all of these solar systems, and finally, to conclude the series, skydive a brave victim volunteer scientist Kerbal directly into a supermassive black hole. Why? In the name of science. My first rocket looks pretty much identical to any other KSP player's first rocket when it comes to a career or science mode save. A simple capsule strapped on top of what is basically a controlled explosion. As you can see though, it does in fact go up, which is what we wanted to do. We can perform a few high altitude science experiments, and hopefully safely parachute down, which unfortunately didn't happen. We were going supersonic towards the ground, the parachute failed, meaning that Jebediah Kerman had to swiftly yet orderly disembark the vessel. As you can see though, luckily he could use his personal parachute to swiftly get to the ground, and I am sure that he is in perfect condition for another flight in about 5 minutes. I also installed another mod which essentially gives you these small aircraft parts on the first tech tree node, and so I've built this simple aircraft here, which I thought would work extremely well, although it didn't end up working so well. Unfortunately, this first attempt was not ideal. However, as you can see, Jeb is completely fine, of course he is, and I am sure that he is completely happy to fly the exact same aircraft with absolutely no modifications and hope for a different result. Now, somehow, we did in fact get a different result, although it was a very sketchy takeoff, to be completely honest, but we actually got airborne, which I was extremely happy about. Although this aircraft was clearly not well designed, as you can see I'm putting in full stick input just to keep straight and level flight. And yeah, we're not going that high at all really. Although we were able to perform a bit of a circuit of the KSC as well as fly over the water, and for some reason I thought it would be a good idea to land in the water to collect science, which we did end up doing, and I somehow thought that the aircraft, despite what happened on the runway, would be in perfect condition to take off again. Now, somehow, someway, it didn't end up working so well. As you can see, we basically rolled over and completely exploded. Jeb, somehow still alive, collected all the science available and returned it to the Kerbal Space Center. We could use this to unlock more parts to build bigger planes and rockets, and I created this absolute monstrosity of an aircraft, and we actually had a relatively smooth takeoff this time, and it was able to fly a little bit more like a plane. Now, I had just managed to get a plane airborne, so the next logical step was to try and land it on the most hazardous terrain on the planet, in the mountain range, and for some reason, this didn't actually work so well. I tried again and again and again, and eventually I just kind of had to stick with it and just deal with this one landing, which didn't really work so well. Anyway, we were still able to collect some reasonable science from the mountain biome, and yeah, we also found this cool crystal. I think it's safe to say though that perhaps it is better to just work on rockets for now, as I haven't had all that much luck with planes. Now, I tried to create a bit of a hot staging sequence with this rocket, having one rocket burn the one below it, although I forgot to consider the actual strength of each of these boosters, which meant that unfortunately my method of hot staging didn't quite work how I envisioned, and we ended up just falling straight out of the sky. Not so good, so the logical solution was to try the exact same rocket again and hope for a different result. And for some reason, we actually didn't get a different result. Now, I just went for another rocket design here using some smaller boosters, and I had to fly extremely horizontally as we often had the problem with no decouplers of it basically just falling directly to the ground and the parachute not being able to open. Anyway, this next flight, I had unlocked a Science Junior from the Science Gain, which allows me to perform a lot more cool science experiments, although somehow I accidentally took on the Mobile Processing Lab, which obviously doesn't work as I don't have antennas on this spacecraft. Although we did in fact get into space, which was very damn cool. Jeb's extremely happy about it, and yeah, this is when I realized that I actually had the wrong part. We were still able to perform some experiments while above the atmosphere though, which was good, and get Jeb on a very sketchy EVA. Re-entering the atmosphere here, I'm sure Jeb was very surprised to not be heading straight to the ground at multiple times the speed of sound, and we actually had a safe landing, which I was even very surprised by actually. Anyway, we now have a considerable amount of science, which means I can unlock some awesome new rocket parts to build a bigger rocket, which I hoped would get to orbit, but as you can see, unfortunately didn't. It was suborbital. We still got a lot of science, so unlocked some more parts, and now we were going for orbit. Now, we did this with a beautiful sunset, as you can see there, and we were heading off. Starting a bit of a gravity turn here, we now actually have a Science Junior attached to the spacecraft, which means we will be able to get hopefully a considerable amount of science from this mission, assuming that it works. And we actually did manage to get to orbit, absolutely running on fumes, but yes, we are orbiting Kerbin. We did an ionization scan and got some groundbreaking science, as you can see there. And then I further extended out my orbit with the remaining fuel I had to get some more science, and wow, it was valuable. Now I just did a quick EVA to collect all of the science because of the possible case of the capsule shooting towards the ground at multiple times the speed of sound, and Jeb enjoyed, I think this is Bob, I actually forgot, enjoyed a nice EVA looking out at the planet Kerbin. All that was left to do now was deorbit, and with the new technology of the decoupler, we could just separate the capsule from the rest of the spacecraft, which did in fact help us not nosedive directly to the ground. We also have a heat shield to protect us from aerodynamic heating, and we also have this mod which adds some beautiful re-entry effects. I actually forgot what it's called, I'll put it on screen. And we get this absolutely beautiful view of a sunrise or sunset, I forgot to be honest. But yeah, we completed an orbit, so I could get a lot of new rocket parts, and the logical next step was to set our eyes on the Mun. However, instead I decided to absolutely maximize the science that I could get from Kerbin, to not much success, although eventually I did manage to get this jet plane working, and I landed it in some different biomes. I'll skip over this mostly because it actually wasn't that interesting, really, and I actually, despite those efforts, didn't get much science. But now it was time to construct a lunar flyby vehicle, and I originally thought this was somehow going to be able to be a lander, that's why there's landing legs on it, which was obviously a bad decision because it added extra weight. But anyway, this mission was in fact successful. So here you can see me designing the rocket, and here is the launch. This mission is obviously just a flyby, which means we're just essentially going to shoot right past it, because we don't have enough fuel to slow down to a speed where it can actually capture us into an orbit. Now, we just did some science in high orbit there, and then we get nice and close, uncomfortably close actually, but yeah, Bob has a cool EVA. Because of the gravity of the Mun, it actually shot us out quite far away from Kerbin, which makes for these incredible views. Now, we had a lot of science, so I think the logical next step after returning was to go for a Mun orbit and even a landing. After passing by a piece of debris that's thousands of degrees, you can tell that safety is clearly a priority in this space program, although here we are splashing down safely. With some new technologies unlocked and basically the same rocket, with the added solution of more boosters, I'm sure this mission will go completely flawlessly. And with all of Kerbal kind watching, Jeb sets off to another world. We begin our ascent here with 6 radial boosters attached while feeding to the central core tank. A slightly sketchy separation later, and we were now powered by that central core stage, which actually took us all the way into space and almost all the way into orbit. The final landing stage carries us the rest of the way to circularize around the planet. In other words, going so fast horizontally that we continuously fall but miss the ground every time. We then arrive at the Mun and slow down enough so that its gravity can pull us into an orbit. With some amazing graphics mods, mainly parallax as noticed here, we get this beautiful view of all of these different craters. Now it was time to go for a landing. Unfortunately, however, this wasn't so ideal. We were heading directly for an absolutely massive crater, which means landing would definitely be a challenge. I also somehow forgot to attach reaction reels to this rocket and any means of regenerating power, which meant controlling it was extremely difficult, especially at low speeds, and yeah, we had some failed attempts. Eventually though, we did land without exploding, although we did have a slight problem. If you look very closely, you may notice that the lander is actually on its side, which is not exactly ideal. After I identified the problem as a future me problem, we got Jeb out to plant a flag, the first flag planted on another celestial body. We then performed some science experiments and began to fly using the EVA jetpack. Now this was very cool seeing the surface of the Mun from above, and as you can see, we are currently flying out of the crater to plant a flag on top of it. I was unsure if this would give us some more science, which is kind of why I flew here, because I thought it might be a different biome. After planting a flag and doing some more flying, it got me thinking about why the real Apollo astronauts didn't use EVA jetpacks like these, as they appear extremely reliable and also very safe. Anyway, now it appeared we had to tackle the problem of getting back home. I was unsure how I would be able to take off here, so I tried to carefully retract the landing gears and then just sort of skid across the ground, although this proved not to work that well at first. But eventually, somehow, someway, we actually managed to successfully take off. And I'm sure Jeb was a bit nervous here, but we eventually got the rocket to have flamey end down and pointy end up. Getting into orbit is much easier with the Mun's low gravity, and then we could simply escape from the Mun and put ourselves on a return trajectory to Kerbin. After separating the capsule, we were re-entering the atmosphere and splashing down safely. Turns out this got us a lot of science points, and I mean a lot, so we could unlock some awesome new technologies. Similarly to real life, after landing on Kerbin's moon, I wanted to build a space station. Here you can see me constructing the first module, which also has a lander on top, and here is the rocket I built to launch it. I one day want this space station to be basically a floating laboratory that could process science from all over the solar system, putting large amounts of data in the hands of expert researchers. To honor their dedication of going to space to process science to further our knowledge of the universe, I fittingly named this space station the Nerdy Space Station. After getting it into orbit, we could deploy our small Minimus lander, which I thought would be able to collect science from Minimus and then transfer it back to the space station to be processed. At least, that was the plan anyway. We have to do quite the burn to accelerate fast enough to get a trajectory even out to Minimus in the first place, but there we go, we are on track for a close flyby anyway. All that we have to do now is speed up time about 2 days until we arrive at Minmus. As you can see, we can now perform a lot of science experiments and perform a circularization maneuver and a landing maneuver to get onto the surface. Now, we actually didn't flip sideways this time, and Jeb planted our second flag. He went on an EVA expedition, which didn't work so well, so we just rewinded a bit and stayed a little bit closer to the spacecraft this time. After performing a lot of science experiments, we were ready to head back. At least so I thought. As you can see there, we are practically running on fumes, and this is nowhere near enough fuel to escape Minmus's gravity. So, yeah, this wasn't gonna work so well. We only had enough fuel to actually get into orbit, and even after trying again, it still didn't work, so we had to send this rescue mission. This spacecraft here would dock to the space station in orbit and then transfer all of its fuel into the space station's propulsion stage so it could get all the way over to Minmus to not only rescue Jeb but also gain a lot of science and research it all over there. After a quite scuffed docking, we transferred all of the fuel and the transfer stage was away and the entire space station was on its way to Minmus. And here we are arriving at Minmus and circularizing around it. Anyway, I just waited until the space station was right behind us to take off with the lander. A bit of a janky takeoff as you can see there, but we did actually get to orbit. Not onto a docking trajectory unfortunately though, so we had to use the space station's fuel to get the two spacecraft close together. Although once they were close enough, we could just EVA Jebediah Kerbin with all of the science from the surface over to the space station. All that was left to do now was to escape Minmus and get back into a low Kerbin orbit. Although the space station didn't actually have enough fuel in its transfer stage from what we supplied to actually get into a completely circular orbit, so it was still slightly elliptical, as you can see there. We'll have to fix that up later. Anyway, all there is to do now is get Jebediah Kerbin into his little escape pod here and get him back down to the surface. As we re-enter the atmosphere here, I'd like to showcase an amazing new mod that I installed known as Firefly, which essentially adds all of these really cool new re-entry particles, and when paired with the other mod, which gives me these really big trails, it makes re-entry absolutely awesome. Anyway, after landing, we gained a whopping 580 science, enough to start building a spacecraft that could get us into interplanetary space. Now, we actually have an upgraded capsule, which means we can have a pilot in case we lose communication with the Kerbal Space Center, we can still perform maneuvers, and a scientist to reset the science experiments. We can save quite a lot of fuel here by just getting a simple Mun flyby that, using its gravity, will slingshot us out of the Kerbin system and into deep space. And hey, there's a pretty cool flyby there. Anyway, now Jeb and Bob are going further than any Kerbal has ever gone before. This is the moment when I realized that I had packed way too much fuel into this thing. I mean, we weren't even up to the final stage of the rocket yet. So I thought we needed to take full advantage of this and try and push this thing all the way into an orbit of Juna. As Kerbin is quite similar to our planet Earth, Juna is also quite similar to our planet Mars in our solar system. It has large polar ice caps as well as a red dusty surface. And with those large polar ice caps, who knows if the Kerbals may be able to eventually detect microbial life still underneath the surface. From some mods that I've added, Juna now also has massive dust storms that constantly sweep over the surface. It also has a quite large moon, unlike Mars in our real solar system, named Ike, and I realized that we actually had enough fuel to land on it, which didn't work so well the first time. However, the second time was significantly better. Although you may notice that we do not have landing gears, which made landing quite a challenge and resulted in us falling on our side, just like with the Mun mission. Once again, however, I ignored this glaring issue and got our Kerbals out on EVA. I'm not sure what's happening with Jeb's spacesuit here, I think it was a bit of a glitch or something, but what a beautiful view of Juna on the horizon. We collected a ton of data from this planet, although takeoff, as you can see there, didn't work so well the first time, but with careful extension of the solar panel, it somehow was able to push up the entire rocket to get us out of Ike. I now wanted to go for a little atmospheric entry into Juna's atmosphere, not enough to slow us down all the way that we'd crash into it, but just enough so that I could gather some more science from it. Now, as you may notice, we do not have nearly enough fuel to return back to Kerbin, so we are stuck orbiting Juna, which is a problem, and I didn't really want to revert to not landing on Ike because we got so much science from that, so a rescue mission was needed to be sent. This rocket looks quite similar to the rocket that put our Kerbals in Juna orbit in the first place, although with an extra seat at the top for another Kerbal. Yeah, I couldn't get this to just be a, unmanned rocket just kind of work autonomously, because I just didn't have the technology to do that, and I was a bit nervous that the transmission wouldn't really work this far away from Kerbin. Although, as you may notice, getting into deep space here, our other spacecraft was actually ejected from Juno orbit, I guess because of a gravity assist around Ike, but after some time, we eventually got the spacecraft close together and transferred both the Kerbals into the rescue vehicle. It was now time to get out of the interplanetary space and get back to Kerbin. Which didn't exactly work the first time. We were going a little bit fast. Yeah, and the second time, we basically just went too high that we didn't burn up, but we were still on an escape trajectory from Kerbin, meaning, yeah, we would be ejected back into interstellar space. So I tried a bit of a different move here that would have us going back slower, and I thought it's here that I mention how I can justify keeping Kerbals in these tiny capsules for about an in-game year. And I'm just imagining that they have stasis chambers or something like that where they can go into a hibernation state. I don't know, but yeah, that's how I justify this, so yeah. And you know, plus Kerbals love space anyway. You know what, maybe let's not question the ethics too much. I mean, after all, it's in the name of science. Anyway, here we are, going back down to Kerbin, and now we are back on the surface, and we gained 1,310 science from that mission, so it was worth that insanely complicated rescue mission. And here I am here purchasing a bunch of new parts. Before I did anything crazy with that technology though, I first needed to swap out the crew on the space station, well, the half-assembled space station, because obviously, due to how long that mission was, they've actually been here for about a year now, so I think the space station can stay uninhabited until it gets finished. Anyway, here we are designing a Minmus base, the first colony/base thing of this series, which is quite an exciting moment. Also, it was this mission where I finally got Blackrock's volumetric clouds to work, and I mean, look how beautiful they are, they really do change the game. Anyway, as our spacecraft descends to orbit, I'd like to talk a little bit about the crew on this mission. We have Jeb as the pilot. Yes, he never gets a break. We also have a scientist and an engineer Kerbal. Anyway, I don't bother checking what their names were, they're just the nerds in the passenger seat. Jeb's the real important one here. Jokes aside, here we are circularizing at Minmus using a bunch of our new technologies to perform some cool science experiments, and here we are touching down in the Minmus flatlands. Now, after watching a couple of tutorials, I did now know how to work the science laboratory, and we can only really transmit the data from it, which sort of makes sense. Anyway, here we have our engineer Kerbal here, slowly setting up our field science experiments on the surface. Anyway, after deploying all those, I was going to use them, although I couldn't figure it out, so I'll have to look that up later. I will definitely use these though. Anyway, we did some more experiments and hopped over to another biome, known as the Midlands, to do some more science experiments. And I mean, the mod Parallax Continue just makes this landscape look absolutely awesome. Anyway, now that the science laboratory had all the science it could possibly get, we performed some science experiments, and after about 100 days they were all done, and we could beam all of the science data all the way back to Kerbin. But after this crew had lived in the habitat for about 100 days, I recognised it was probably time for a crew transfer. And I mean, they worked really hard on the surface as we got thousands upon thousands of science from that transmission. Anyway guys, I did hope you enjoyed this video despite it being absurdly long, so yeah, we are going to wrap it up here. The next episode should only be like half the length of this episode at most. I'm really sorry about it, but I hope you enjoyed this video anyway. I certainly enjoyed making it, and I'll see you all next time.